We're going to start this morning with the one of the pre-webinar questions that we sent out was, did you find where the title of the book Untracked came from? And Ben addressed it in this chapter briefly. I think the title probably goes beyond this chapter. I think he'll be sharing some of that just shortly. So I wanted to share some of your responses. We'll kind of maybe add my thoughts in that. And those that did respond, you certainly did find where the title came from. In this chapter, he mentions how we're on this track based on the institution. So some of your responses was, it is the example of the existing church structure confining the body as train tracks due to a train, not allowing us to veer from the norm. That's a very good description. If you think of tracks, the train cannot go off the tracks. It'll be disastrous. So Ben has encouraged us to think untracked, but not the disastrous route. And then another response was, I think the title comes from your thoughts about detaching yourself from the doctrinal church and perhaps wondering about being more effective by open sourcing the best way to get the story of Jesus out. And this response goes on, is it necessary? I'm not sure. Perhaps there are denominations or individual churches that work to be the loving agents of God's mission on earth. Certainly the struggles over doctrine and inerrancy affect most or perhaps all Christian denominations. And that's a great response. I think there certainly are exceptions out there that live more what we would call the on-track life. And then I would say most of them are on the tracks. This comment goes on and refers back to the early church in the first 3 centuries, and maybe if we get back to that type of application of living how Jesus lived, we might be more effective. So thank you for those responses. We certainly appreciate that. Anything else here? Yeah, I know when since I was kind of involved in putting this book together, when we were thinking of the title, Ben came up with the title for several reasons. He'll share that in just a moment. But if you think of the cover of the book as well, if you've noticed that the cover of the book is a little boy going over a fence, and there's a sign on the fence that says enter at your own risk. And if you notice, there's a path in front of the fence, which is how we portrayed in the cover of the book, how we portrayed the track. But we're inviting you to come off that track or come off the normal path, cross over the fence, and go more into the wilderness with us, into the adventures of what that might be. So that's kind of where I picked up where the title of the book came from, as well as some of you as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Ben, and he can maybe expand on that as well as share his thoughts about our reading this morning.
Thank you, Karma, and good morning, everybody. It is always fun to do this. And yes, I think that relates pretty well just to how the title of this book came about. There were a number of things. Number one, I'd done several podcasts that I never did produce, but they were based on this whole idea of train tracks that the institution creates, and then the different types of tracks there were, depending on if you were fundamentalist, if you were a liberal, if you were, just all kinds of different things. And it was really interesting to me at the time, and still is, because it portrayed some ideas of how the institution holds on to us, even though I don't think the people within it intend that to happen. Even those in leadership often do not intend it to happen. But once the institution is in place, what it does to our thought processes. And it was those tracked thought processes that we had to stay within these tracks, or the institution didn't know what to do with us and did not want us to leave those tracks because it became a threat to its existence. And it was out of those ideas, and then this whole idea of being in the wilderness and loving to go places that were untracked, that weren't necessarily the norm for everyone to go to, that they were the places that sometimes you just turn the corner and take your breath away. And wanting to be in those places. And so the title of the book comes much from that. Now, this chapter this morning, I wrote it in 2008, October of 2008. We've just been to Italy. We've just been to Rome. Um, and it's a month later now, but the story happens a little bit like this. I've come out of the Mamertine prison, and whether it was actually where Paul or Peter were actually incarcerated, it nevertheless was a very moving experience because as you're in the prison and you're down where they would have kept the prisoners, and this prison was built sometime, 600 years before Christ. So it's been in existence a while, and it's a dungeon, and the prisoners are actually dropped through a hole, and that hole still exists. They can look up through that hole, and there's a grating there. But they're kept in this dungeon, this prison, and it's a moving experience as you're down there. Now there's of course steps going down that they placed there, but as you're down there, the feeling of ah goodness, what was it like to live in those first years of Christendom? And what did it feel like, perhaps being incarcerated down there and knowing that you had no power, you didn't have a voice to speak as far as to the authorities. The state didn't give you some kind of a place at the table, but you were simply someone in prison who was trying to lead people in the way of Jesus. What it felt like, and I came out of there deeply moved inside, deeply moved, and went from there wanting to be quiet. Went from there to a church cathedral, not one of the great cathedrals, but just close by, in this church that was built in the Middle Ages. And of course, to us, that's very, very old. So it's 1,000 years old, or better, something like that time period. And I go in to be quiet, and I go to sit, and I sit in the front, and there's some sort of ceremonial service about to take place, but I just go and sit in the front, and one of the front benches. They're not comfortable; they're just benches, and just to kind of ponder. And as I'm there, I look up, and I look up and see this high platform pulpit area that has winding steps going up to it, and that's where the priest would have gone to deliver the homily, the sermon of the day, and to talk to his people. And as I've read the history now of this church, of this building, I feel what it feels like to sit there in those days of indulgences and people having to feel constantly guilty that they hadn't kept every little detail of the church's will. Saying that specifically so we don't relate it to God's will, even though that's what they were told. And as I sat there, I realized how insignificant you would feel in that position, sitting there when there's a pulpit way above you and you have to look up to see it. But you were encouraged instead to keep your head down while you were being told from above how bad you were and how you needed to give so that you could pay for your eternal salvation. And it seemed so strange to me. What it was this feeling of I had gone from the powerlessness of the early church and yet living out the faith in Jesus and following him and giving their lives away to the empowered church, not empowered by God, but empowered by the state. And how the church had changed from that time. It was startling. And out of that story is what this chapter got written. It's there that it began to just play in my mind. I don't care about the empty cathedral. I don't care that there are statues that people have no idea what they're for. I don't care that our denominations are losing. What I care about is that somehow the story of Jesus is not being told in a winsome way that people just get. And they say, oh, I need that. Oh, I want to live my life that. That's what was missing. But it was in a time, remember, I was still within at that point. I was still inside the structures. I was still trying to work and change from within. And what was interesting is I was facing all of those fears from the denominational leaders, and I was facing all the fears from other pastors and other church leaders, and you realized that those fears were holding him back because they were afraid that somehow the church was losing ground, somehow the church would go away, somehow this whole thing, we've got to do something different. And isn't it terrible that people don't care anymore to come to church? Those kind of things. And this chapter is written out of that in 2008. It's not some continuum that I just wrote as part of this book. It was just the piece that I wrote as I came back from that trip to Rome. And just this piece inside, it's stayed with me. And even though I'm on the outside now and I might approach the chapter somewhat differently, the truth of this being a letter to the existing church, is what rose out of this piece that when we were empowered by Rome to sit at the table of power with the other institutions of the day, something changed dramatically in it. And all of the surroundings, we kept Jesus within, but the surroundings of the story, the cathedral, churches, history, and I love history. And this is hard for me to even say in that sense. I don't want to see the cathedrals go away. I don't want to see the statues go away as far as history. But it doesn't matter to me as far as the lives of people. All I want to really see is that they hear with my life what Jesus taught us with his life and his words, his actions in this world. I want them to see that and know that they are important, loved by God that wants to see them as valuable and does see them as valuable, wants them to see that he sees them. And I long for them to feel that and not feel all of the surroundings that somehow have become irrelevant or have made them feel belittled or maybe even in their own sense arrogant. And Paul, I won't mention your last name, but mention here um, your comment even this morning, and some of your comments I love when you comment. So this morning, that's where the whole idea of fear came from. I realized I wrote that from within the the institutional church and the fear that the institution itself had of losing control of this whole thing. From the side that you mentioned this morning, I am in 100% agreement. I think apathy and complacency now from those that are part of the institution but not in the leadership is, and the leadership wants to keep them in this complacency in many ways, is simply that, oh, I've done what it takes. I've paid my indulgence. I am going to make it into heaven. I've done that now. I've given my life to Jesus, or whatever it is. I've become a member of the church. And that apathy and complacency is very difficult to overcome. I fear that less if we could get past the institution fears, because activists of all time have always been the change agents that finally break our complacency. So I would hope that somehow all of us can be part of that change of the complacency that is there because the institutional church lives for that to be there. Now, I shared all of that, and I'm wondering what were some of your thoughts and what kind of feelings did it raise when you read this chapter? And do you think that Christianity has become irrelevant, almost irrelevant at least in the world, and ineffective in really presenting Jesus, really being who he was, really sharing his heart in the world? What do you think? Do you have any comments or thoughts this morning as we move on with this?
We have one comment here. It says, we have become too comfortable with church as is. In that way, it has become irrelevant.
Interesting. Interesting. It becomes irrelevant, perhaps, to living a life like Jesus lived and how he longed for us to give our lives away to others, because we simply become comfortable with we go to church. I would assume that's what's being referred to that. So thank you. Other comments or questions this morning? Do you think that the church, the institution, is concerned about its uh, ability to stay um, in control and to stay relevant to our lives? Even do you think it's concerned? Um, are any of you reading anything on those areas or things in your life?
We have
That's
another comment here. I understand that the church is growing in the third world, where perhaps the focus is more on teaching Jesus.
Paul. That's a really interesting observation. Yes, the church is growing in the third world, in the world of non economically strong countries, and sometimes even in countries that are becoming economically strong now, but many of their people are still in poverty. And it's really interesting, or not just poverty, but maybe they've been in persecuted, those type of things, and the church is growing in those areas. And what's interesting about that is the tendency for the church to not be institutional in those areas. Um, Although sometimes it is even there, but it seems to offer to people this whole idea that Jesus is there for them. What an incredible thing it is. But in our culture, where it simply has become a place for power and uh, authority, we like it. We like our politics to be a certain way. I say that, and we cross the spectrum of politics in Christianity, that um, it be power issues become the focus. In many of those countries, it simply has been that people need to know that they are cared about. They need to understand that God actually wants good for them. And it's an interesting thing to watch that in the world. And I think, to me, it's uh, one of the difficulties is that um, religion itself becomes unimportant to the message of Jesus. In fact, it becomes constraining and um, perhaps even imprisoning to the message of Jesus. And that scares me in the entirety of the world, whether it's first world or third world, that somehow we lock it in to a religion. When this whole idea of that Jesus brings to us seems to supersede, seems to go beyond, seems to be outside the walls of any institution at all. And uh, it bothers me somewhat that somehow, even in those countries, we will begin to break it down into, are you uh, Catholic or are you Protestant? Um, if it's Christianity. And so then we begin to make converts out of our own faith, even on the bigger level or on the Christian side of things. People might have been Christian in the sense that they were not Muslim or they were not um, uh, some other faith of Buddhist or they were not Hindu, but um, now perhaps we count them as converts because we changed them from Roman Catholicism to Protestantism or something of that vein. And what bothers me in all of that is I think, oh, but once again, we encapsulated Jesus into this religion rather than into a lifestyle and into a love for people and making the world better. This whole idea that God cares about every one of us. Thanks, Paul. Any other comments?
I have a question just from my perspective. I'm not sure how to ask it. Um, do you do you feel that the institution knows that it's a kind of a power struggle? And I guess I'm coming from my perspective where, and your perspective, Ben, was that you were a pastor, so you've involved from the institution in that role. My role was I attended church and did some of the like small group activities or went out and tried to live my life as Jesus would. But I really wasn't aware of the bigger picture, which you're much better at, of kind of where the whole institution was heading. Now that I know you and have spoken, got to know you and Brenda, and then hear more of your thoughts behind, I see now where you're coming from, and I see the incredible concern of where the institution is going. Do people involved in your role, do they see that bigger picture? Does that make
Yes
sense?
and no. Yes and no.
Okay.
And yes is a very small minority. No is the greatest number. Um, and that is simply because everybody is gifted differently. Everybody has different strengths, and some their strengths lie in areas of trends and looking at big pictures, and that tends to be where my whole brain functions and my heart functions there as well often. But I don't expect everybody else's gifts to be in those areas, and wouldn't want them to be. My goodness, we need all of the different types of strengths that people have. But in looking at an institution, I can probably explain it best by saying this first. I don't believe that most of the people within institutions think to themselves, I'm a bad person and I'm just trying to control others. I just don't think that exists much. it may to some degree when corruption lies in the power to such an extent that those in control just know all they want to do is keep control. That exists. It doesn't. It doesn't maybe exist. It does exist. But nevertheless, the vast majority of those, even in leadership positions, don't think of this in terms of control. They think of it in terms of survival. And that's what I'm going to step ahead into the book a little ways to the nickels and noses idea, which that term is basically a religious term, but it's the idea is across the board in the corporate world, in the government world, wherever. What happens is once something is institutionalized, once it moves into the form of we have to we have an institution that controls everything, that says what we believe, it what happens is you have two things that become very important. One is you have to have a constituency. You have to have people that are followers of that. That's the noses, okay? And then the second piece is you have to have the nickels. There has to be funds, money to keep it going. And survival is simply that you have to have both of those things in place. If either one of them or both of them begin to leave you, if they begin to grow smaller, everybody becomes worried. So nickels and noses is the big thing. Do I have money? Do I have people that are following me? And so what happens in institutions, and this becomes the hard piece of change within, is that the institution, once it's in place, its primary concern simply becomes survival. We do not have funerals for institutions. They haven't ever been set up. We need to. We need to be able to say, "Oh, that was a good thing when it started. It maybe had some good ideas, but it's done its life cycle now. We need to allow it to die. We need to have its funeral. We need to say goodbye to it." But that doesn't usually happen. Instead, what happens is everyone becomes involved in keeping the institution alive. Now, that's true in the whole of Christianity. It's true of the divisions between the Eastern and the Western Church, or the Protestantism and Catholicism. It's true all the way down on each denomination, and it's true in individual churches. So once you become an institution, what happens is you have to have nickels and noses to keep going, and that becomes the fight. And um, if I can mention a comment yesterday, I won't put the name to this so that we can't put too much to it. I think it was really interesting in the email yesterday that the whole idea that it it was difficult to get churches involved in a very excellent reading program that would have been very, very helpful to the core constituency of the region. And uh, in trying to do that, emails were sent to the churches, and they just did not respond. It didn't respond to the emails at all. And the question became, um, you know, why didn't they respond? And I can tell you that the reason they probably did not respond was simply that so much effort was being made by those pastors to simply keep their institutions prospering. That this was not a piece that was going to bring in any money. It was not a piece that was probably going to bring in any people that could support the church. And so once again, those things, even though those pastors probably really wanted to be involved in those kind of things, it became, I don't have any energy left to do those things. So that's often what's behind it in churches and why they don't step out more, even though the people themselves and the pastors themselves probably inside want to. Did I go way too far on that, Tom?
No, that was good. Interesting. I had my I was muted, so I turned my mic back on really quick.
Hmm.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions this morning? I'm muting my phone if you're wondering. One of the things I think I've attempted to accomplish in this is I wanted us to see the track that the institution put us on. But then I also wanted to go to what would happen if. And that piece just fascinates me. And that's where I want to turn it out to the streets and open sources as to how we get to the streets again and how we actually get to where people are and how to make a difference in their lives. And so I tell the story or give the illustration rather of a father hearing this and coming home to his family and saying, you know, there's a mom down the street whose husband just left her with 3 kids. And what can we do to help her? What an incredible thought. That seems to me to hit straight at the heart of what good news really is. And if you've read that part in the chapter, you know, I go on from there and I talk about what would happen if some businessmen got together and said, man, I wish we could do something about poverty in third world countries or in some place they've seen on the news. I wish we could do something about that. Or I wish we could make our community a place where people love to live and they just felt their families had a great place to live. And there were those kind of conversations going on and it was it was this whole idea that could we bring the magic of the story of Jesus back? And of course I think that it's entirely possible. And it's possible for every one of us to do that. Even more so if we can get two or three of us or more together and begin saying, oh, I know about this situation. And we begin to bring our different strengths to the table. But we're doing it out of this whole idea. How do we bring good news? Same way Jesus, same way he seemed to teach us in laying down our lives. What an incredible thing that would be if we could quit thinking about tax write-offs and keeping institutions alive or church buildings full or denominations going, and we instead were thinking, how is it that we can live our lives out like Jesus did and make it not only what he did, but what we're doing that's similar to that out of our spirit. Do you think that can be done again? I love the whole conversation that could go on around that. So that that's where the real goal of this chapter was, to take us off that track, to get us to this place where once again we could maybe make it not nickels and noses that we were worried about or institutional growth, but rather how is it that we really give good news? How is it that we make Jesus really known again? How do we pass this faith in someone who came here and showed us a way that was absolutely remarkable? life changing, value giving. How do we make that happen? Do you have any thoughts?
I'll start by sharing some of the responses that we got.
Good.
One of them mentioned how with his new job, his main focus is to give value to a group of employees that work for him. So it's giving value to those around him.
Mm-hmm.
Another response was to walk the walk, to look for things to demonstrate your love for your neighbor or others, or join community efforts to help the poor. And another one was, this one referred to more of some of the things going on in the news and what they saw as a demonstration of what Jesus would do. And that was a demonstration recently of the uprisings between the police and the communities, and how
Mm-hmm.
in the news they noticed one of the it was two different demonstrations going on two different sides, but it became more than that because those two different demonstrators for two different things on the two different sides combined their demonstration into one. So a showing of unity and a love for each other. And then the other news item that they mentioned was a group of strangers. There was a car accident and the car had rolled over on the driver, and all these strangers came together that were around the accident and actually lifted the car up and flipped it back over and probably saved the guy's life. So these were completely strangers from all different walks of life, yet they're working together and showing love and unity, probably as Jesus would.
How incredible. How incredible. Isn't it interesting? I end this chapter with a piece, and you can tell I'm working from within in because at this time, some of the questions were, well, if we were to get out and do that, how about this scriptural mandate that we have from the book of Hebrews that says, "Do not forsake the assembly of yourselves together." And um, so I bring that up, and I talk about that whole idea of assembling. And of course, Scripture is blank when it talks about how to assemble. It just says, don't forget, it's be together. And all of that brings this to mind because how much better are we together as even total strangers if we're all together for a purpose and we lift the car off someone and save his life? We've done that together. One person, that wouldn't have happened. But even beyond that, and we go to these ideas where one is giving their life to give value to employees, and uh, another is walking the walk in the daily things, maybe helping someone, a child, learn to read, or maybe giving their lives away in any one of a thousand different ways. I think of a story we just heard, and I won't express it at all, but of a couple, except to say this: a couple that is that we know that is giving a tithe of their income or a portion of their income at least to a social service organization that is government run or at least subsidized, that then each month they just give it to this person who's over it, and they do this wonderful thing. They now have some funds that are just free and available for them to give to someone in need that maybe has a heart that wants to get going, and they give an accounting every month of, oh man, we used the money this way and how beneficial it was. And I think, oh wow, how like Jesus. And that money's just going, nope, they're not being told who gave the money or anything else. It's just available. And this person is around people that are needy all the time. So he sees the need. What an incredible thing. How much better if we could get the strengths of different ones together, two, three, four, 6, 10, 25 people, whatever it happens to be, that all saying, how do we live our lives Do we know people that need good news in their life? Can we find ways that Jesus be visible to them? Wow. Think of that type of assembling ourselves together. So different than institutionally doing it, where we have to support all of that. I see another one there. Hon, could you share that with us as
Sure.
well?
Sure. Understand your point about fear being a motivation for people running the institutional church. How do we encourage people to embark on an untracked study of the Bible and biblical history? There are lots of Bible passages that are never used as sermon topics.
Oh,
Yes.
yes, Paul. I, as a pastor of many, many years, that one makes me grin. There are many Bible passages that are never used as sermon topic. Those are those are some fun ones. Um, because if you are going to think of Scripture in the terms that the institution wants us to, and think in terms of inerrancy and authoritativeness, and we can't see it instead as stories and experiences and ways that people tried to do things and God and people interacting and all of the different things, and then the view of history that comes from different writers at different times. Well, we have to ignore passages because how would we ever preach some of the passages of the Old Testament if we do it from the idea of inerrancy or we do it from the idea of authoritative? Well, there are some passages that if we do it that way and we make them legalistic and we make them law, we are not going to be able to preach them because we wouldn't have anybody in our churches. But so this whole idea that instead we can see them as this recording of these stories and this wonderful um, book of that's put so many things together from beautiful poetry and psalms that express our heart during all kinds of times and words of wisdom that are given to us, but also all of the different things that come through different periods of time historically, and we can look at them and say, wow, we live now. And this is where we are culturally. And there are some of these things that we don't face anymore. Some things that we can look at and say, yeah, glad we're past that now. All of those things that you need to encourage it from that way. And then, Paul, if we do it from that perspective, we can look at all of it and we can laugh at with some of it. We can go, whoa, that was wild. And some of it, we can, but, and we can look at it and lessons to be learned, things to look at. It really becomes very, very interesting. Then biblical history and the Bible itself becomes very interesting. Otherwise, we read it through and we have to skip. Oh, I know what you're saying. What we have to do is we have to move away from this track idea that the Bible was written for us, that God intended us to take it as an inerrant, infallible, authoritative Word of God that we have to follow in detail. And every bit of it is meant to perfectly give us the thought of God. And when we look at it that way, we can't really enjoy going through it historically and seeing it for what it is, seeing this progression of truth. Wow, that's an interesting one, Paula. I don't know if I even took it too far here for some of us to stomach. I don't know.
And And just to add to that, because I really, that's a great question, Paul, and I think that's kind of what we're trying to discover ourselves is how do we encourage these ideas that we're hearing about? How do we get others to join us on the Untracked adventure? That's a very valid question, and I think we're probably all learning that together.
Oh yes, yes. Any insights and encouragements along this way we look forward to, we look for from each of you. All of that is so helpful. I do not consider myself a leader of this type of thing as far as organizing anything. I'm hoping the thoughts bring discussion and bring change in ways that will just make our world a wonderful place again. I know we've gone over our time. We're at 48 minutes this morning. And I want to leave it open for just a moment again. I'm going to go silent again for just a moment if there's any last things that people want to say. And then we're going to close it out for the day, and we'll start in again next week. And we'll be looking at one reason I started on this quest and perhaps wrong premise with that. And I encourage you to go to those chapters, and we'll continue on with this discussion next week as well if you would like to, if there are any thoughts come on what we've discussed today. Now I'll be quiet for a moment. Thanks.
I'll just add in there, just so you're aware, next week Ben and I won't be at our home office. We'll be traveling somewhat, so we plan on we will do this next week. I'm not sure, depending on connectivity, whether it's going to be by video or not, but we'll still probably go to the same little chat room that we're in now, and at least you will hear our voices. Hopefully we'll have good enough connectivity to also do the video, but we certainly hope to carry on as we have been doing each Sunday. We will certainly carry on. We're just not sure what that will look like next week. I don't see anything else come in. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. Again, we always appreciate you taking the time out to join us. We appreciate the comments, the discussions, the questions. We love doing this together with all of you. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. You guys have a great week and enjoy the rest of your Sunday.